All right, so that's fine. So if I go back one step, I guess two things that have really intrigued me about I guess farming in these environments, and it's two just personal experiences I've had. One was in 1978. This graph doesn't go back to 1978, but we went back to 1978. We'd had this pretty big peak here somewhere, and at that stage, my father was farming the land, and I'd just come back from Roseworthy. We had a really good year. We could have grown wheat on a bitumen road in 1978. It was just fantastic. Dad had never averaged above 2 tonnes of the hectare, and that year he averaged very close to 3. He had 370 acres planted on his 1,200 acre farm. He replaced his tractor, replaced his car, and he still had this bucket load of money that he'd never seen in his life in his bank account. And he was really pleased about that, and it was really, really good and whatever. I, as this young bloke out of Roseworthy, was saying, was there a way we could have picked that? We planted 370 acres, we've got a 1,200 acre farm. Why didn't we plant 8 or 9 or 1,000 acres and never have to work again? So that was my theory. So that was just this bloody upstart from Roseworthy. But it was just stuck in the mind saying, could we have ever picked that year? It was a year that we actually beat Bordertown. We actually grew better yields than Bordertown in 1978. How about that? Absolutely. You go and check the bloody hundreds. Amazing. We beat Maitland. We beat Saddleworth. It was just one of those years. All right, so that was the first thing. The second thing was the thing that really intrigued me. So I joined the bank, and our role within I used to work for the Commonwealth Development Bank. I don't know whether some of you may remember the Commonwealth Development Bank. It was a lender of last resort or whatever. So we lent on prospects of success, whatever they were. But it was our role as rural officers in the bank to do that viability assessment work. So we became really skilled at assessing long-term viability. That was our role. And I used to apply those same processes to our own farm. And at that stage I was working off farm, but working back on the farm was at any time we could. And I could never show that we were particularly viable. And yet, over time, we did pretty well. And I looked at that generally across our system within the banking industry, and I saw any businesses with high levels of viability tended to be able to withstand things better than we thought they were going to do. And then when we go to people who had tended to have more reliable incomes, like Maitland farmers or high income farmers or high rainfall farmers, they didn't tend to do much better than what we would say that they would within the banking assessment type process. And I thought, what's going on here? Why are these highly variable systems actually working better than we think they're going to do? So that just stuck in the mind. So that's really the sort of thing that I want to talk about now, about some of those processes. And what I think we have to understand is the processes that are happening. So I'm going to do a little bit of a theory lesson here. And what I think is happening, and you probably know this because all of you or anybody operating in these systems understand this. But I'm going to write up 2 words. Hopefully you can read them. That says uncertainty for those who can't read it. And that word is risk. Now, can anyone tell me the difference between uncertainty and risk? Don't all speak at once. Anybody?
Risk has got a probability on it.
Spot on. Absolutely, spot on. So basically, uncertainty is about, yes, the unknowns. And risk is about knowns. And that's fundamentally the difference. And I think if we've got any hope of understanding the system that we use within farming, and I think generally, we have to sort of recognise that we deal with variability by looking at these 2 factors. And so basically we deal with uncertainty by setting up a whole heap of strategies, which... That's not right, is it? There's a T there. I haven't got spell check on this board. We set up a whole heap of strategies that allow us to cope with the uncertainty. And to an extent, if you think about it, we're actually almost farming for average. That's just the way we do these things. With risk, though, it's all about tactical management. And what we do with risk, and what Greg was talking about, is we're trying to identify where the process is going, or where things are going. We predict where things are going, and we make some decisions accordingly. Now, in this environment here, we have an enormous number of uncertainties, and we have some risks. And the key to farming and achieving really good returns is to push as many things that way as we can, basically. Because this here is all about farming for the average. This here is about farming on the margin. And that's where we have to be. But there's absolutely no point in pushing into that area if it's an unrealistic assessment of the predictability. So that's essentially what we're trying to sort of come to grips with in this environment. What are some of the strategies that allow us to cope with the uncertainties? And then, if we can identify risks, and using soil moisture and a whole range of other things we can in certain circumstances, when we can identify those risks, what are the tactics we can use to actually allow those risks to work in our favour? If you think about life in general, it's all about the same thing. So, any questions on that? That's understood? So what do we do here in the upper north? So I want to sort of have a little bit of, if you like, a critique of what we're doing here in the upper north. So what are some of the strategic responses that we do? So this is about improving resilience, about managing a really variable climate so that we can actually survive it and cope with those uncertainties. Well, the first thing in any strategic response, diversification or specialisation. Now, I've already talked about that on the buses, but you know, we're reasonably lucky here in the north that livestock do have a really good fit in this environment. If they didn't, I think we'd have trouble. But we've got two enterprises, livestock and cropping. I think probably livestock have a better fit in this environment than cropping, but it doesn't matter. They're still reasonably complementary. They're not totally complementary, but they're reasonably complementary. So we can put those two together, and in terms of managing the uncertainty, they work really well. So I think we can give ourselves a bit of a, we'll say B plus, A minus, A plus. I don't know, but that's fantastic for the upper north that we have that sort of capacity to run that. Appropriate scale. That's another one of these strategic responses that we do. And I mentioned appropriate scale. I don't necessarily subscribe to the the get big or get out sort of theory, but I do heavily subscribe to the fact that we have to do things appropriately in terms of scale. It was interesting yesterday. I actually caught up with my neighbour. My neighbour's a school teacher, and he's got a 75-acre farm alongside his house, 75-acre paddock. And he used to, when he first bought this paddock, he went and bought himself an old Ford tractor and a combine and a header. And he was out there and he farms. He was always farming it late, and he never got anything off it, and got sick of it after a while. And he rang me up one day and said, "Do you want to farm it, Barry?" And I said, "Yeah, all right, yeah, I'll just pull in there and crop it. It's just right alongside our farm." And so what I do now is I pull in there and we sow it, and if we get a crop off it, I'll work out what I've cost to do it, and we just divide the profit, just split it down the middle, half and half. So his 75-acre farm, yesterday I went and handed him a $10,000 cheque, because that was his share of the profit from that farm. And he's got the most appropriate scale in the world. All his input, his whole labour input, his machinery input, his everything was a discussion we had for 10 minutes. Back in April or something. What are we going to do with the land this year, Greg? Oh yeah, we'll put a crop of wheat on it or something. So there's nothing wrong with being small, as long as it's appropriately bent. And one of the things I think we don't do very well in the upper north, and it's something we have to focus on, is this area, because we've got far too many small farms, and that's going to really struggle. So scale in terms of machinery is not right. Our scale in terms of labour tends to struggle. We've got farmers that basically are cropping, I don't know, pull a figure up, Kym. I mean, say they might be cropping 1,000 or 1,500 acres and they're running 600 sheep and think they're busy. They're going to have to move into a different sort of area to be able to survive the sort of processes where we're going into. So appropriate scale's really important, and I think that's not an area that's an area we need to work on within the farming system in the upper north. Maintenance of high equities, I mean, we said about that. That's just absolutely critical. We just can't survive in this area. We can't survive that variability without basically maintaining high equities and having some buffer in the system. So And of course, that's easier said than done, given the run of seasons we've had. How the hell do you maintain a high equity when you produce no income for 5 years? But that's another story. Attention to detail. So these are just typical things that we all have to do, and we do in the upper north. Attention to details, adopting progressive technology. I mean, that's just that occurs right across the landscape, and I think we do really well in the upper north. I think they're reasonably progressive farmers, and they're doing a good job of accepting all that. This is a pet of mine. I think one of these, just tied up with this scale bit, we've got to try to increase our scale. You know, I think too often we tie so much of our capital up in land. We just got to try to increase our scale, but not by buying it. So that if we had a really interesting discussion with a consultant out of New Zealand a few years ago, and I said at that stage I was using an index to assess whether or not where I thought yields were going in any one year, and I'd use that index to sort of drive my decisions on cropping. And I said one of these days, one of these days I'm going to make a lot of money out of this. And I'm actually going to have an absolute killing with the farm and make a lot of money. He said, what are you going to do with the money when you make it? And I said, I haven't even thought about it. He said, you're going to get it straight off farm, aren't you? You can't farm in this really intensely variable system without having some buffer somewhere else. So I guess I think too often we tend to buy the farm next door. We perhaps should be leasing it and putting some of our surplus funds away from the farm. And that's another thing in terms of that. I've personally done quite a bit of leasing, but it's always with this lease cost reflecting profit, not dollar value, because you can go under pretty quickly in these sorts of environments. And there's been plenty of examples like that where people have gone under because they've basically locked themselves into a cash deal on leasing, and it doesn't reflect their profit at all. So these are some of the strategic responses that we put into place.
Sorry, can you give me a bit more detail, like the lease cost reflecting profit only? So what do you mean?
Oh, well, look, you name it. Anyway, one would be obviously relate the lease cost to rainfall. That would be one way. So that basically the average lease in this area might be $25 an acre, and it would be a rainfall adjusted. Another one, as I said, with the bloke next door, we just work out the profit and divide it. So if we make no profit, he gets no income. So it's just, and then there's a myriad way of doing it. I mean, you can push it into go into a share farming agreement too. So it's just more about this concept that in these environments, you can't lock yourself into absolute guarantee. I'm going to have to pay you $25,000 to lease your farm or whatever it might be. That's all.
Is it accepted in the market, like so the bloke owning the land, is that accepted?
Well, no, that's the problem. That's one of the problems is that if he gets the choice between him doing it for a guaranteed figure and him doing it for a non, then there may be some conflict. But that's a problem. But what do you? I mean, if you're going to operate in this environment, you have to have some ground rules, and I think that's one of the ground rules that I think you have to have. If you don't have it, well, you can whatever.
Can I just ask a question?
Yep.
Leasing versus buying. My sort of thoughts are that in farming, one of the ways you get ahead over time is, over the longer term, is increasing the value of your land.
Yep.
So in this marginal area, you guys not confident that will happen?
Well, I'm more confident that my unit in Adelaide will increase better than my land. Certainly our capital appreciation hasn't been anywhere near. I haven't done the figures on that, but I don't think anecdotally our capital appreciation wouldn't have been anywhere near as much as the better rainfall country. But all I'm saying is that we just run such a variable system that if we can diversify, put our capital somewhere else, I think it's a really good process. Someone I heard in Western Australia had this concept that he would take 10% of his gross income and invest it off farm, because he said he'd never missed 10%. And I thought, what a fantastic idea. I've never been able to do it. I've never had the spare 10%.
Superannuation, isn't it?
Essentially, yeah. Yeah, well, it is.
You're saying houses in Adelaide the last 10 years went up 200% in value, I think, and where probably land values haven't. So you're saying lease and then invest in it.
Yeah, well, I just think it's something